The Day the Mongols Terrified All of Europe. Part 1. The Army That No One Could Stop. There are moments in history when entire civilizations believe they are witnessing the end of their world. In the spring of 1241, that moment arrived for Europe. Across the eastern horizon came an army unlike anything the continent had ever faced. They moved faster than any messenger, struck harder than any kingdom could resist, and vanished before exhausted defenders even understood what had happened. Villages burned overnight. Castles that were believed to be invincible fell in days. Refugees flooded west, with terrifying stories of warriors who never seemed to tire, never showed mercy, and never lost. To many Europeans, they did not appear to be ordinary soldiers. They looked like a force sent to punish the world itself. Yet only a few decades earlier, these feared conquerors had been divided tribes struggling to survive on the endless grasslands of Central Asia. Life on the Mongolian steppe was harsh beyond imagination. Winters were brutally cold, summers unbearably dry, and survival depended on skill, endurance, and constant movement. Children learned to ride horses almost before they could walk. They practiced archery from an early age, hunted across enormous distances, and lived in a world where weakness often meant death. Every day prepared them for war. Among these tribes, around the year 1162, a boy named Temujin was born. His childhood offered little reason to believe he would one day become one of history's greatest conquerors. His father, a tribal leader, was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was still young. Overnight, his family lost its protection. Former allies abandoned them, leaving his mother and siblings to survive alone. Hunger became their constant companion. They gathered roots, caught fish with their bare hands, and fought simply to stay alive. Temujin learned that trust could disappear in an instant, and that survival depended on determination more than luck. As he grew older, he refused to accept the fate that others expected for him. Slowly he gathered loyal followers, not because he was born into great power, but because he rewarded courage and loyalty instead of noble birth. He united clans that had hated each other for generations. Those who resisted were defeated. Those who joined him became part of something entirely new. In 1206, after years of warfare and political brilliance, the tribal leaders proclaimed him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. The empire he began building was unlike any the world had seen. Genghis Khan transformed scattered horsemen into a disciplined military machine. Promotions depended on ability rather than family connections. Officers who proved themselves in battle could rise regardless of their background. Strict discipline governed every campaign. Cowardice was punished severely, while bravery was rewarded generously. Every soldier understood that success depended on unity. The Mongol army possessed advantages that shocked every enemy it encountered. Each warrior traveled with several horses, allowing them to switch mounts during long journeys and maintain incredible speed. While European knights often relied on heavy armor and slow movement, Mongol horsemen could travel astonishing distances in a single day. They carried powerful composite bows capable of striking accurately from horseback, even while galloping at full speed. Years of practice made them deadly marksmen. But weapons alone did not explain their victories. The Mongols mastered tactics that many opponents had never experienced. One of their most famous strategies was the feigned retreat. During battle, they would deliberately pretend to panic and flee. Confident enemies abandoned their defensive positions and rushed forward in pursuit. Then, at precisely the right moment, The Mongols turned, surrounded the advancing army from multiple directions, and destroyed it. Entire armies disappeared because they believed they had already won. Communication was another secret of their success. Flags, horns, drums, and smoke signals allowed commanders to coordinate thousands of soldiers across vast battlefields. Every movement had been planned in advance. While enemy commanders struggled to adapt, Mongol units operated with remarkable precision. What appeared to be chaos was often a carefully designed trap. Equally terrifying was the reputation that spread ahead of them. Cities that resisted and forced long sieges were sometimes destroyed completely. Survivors carried horrifying stories to neighboring kingdoms, warning them of the consequences of resistance. Fear became a weapon as powerful as swords or arrows. Many towns surrendered without a fight, hoping mercy would spare them from destruction. Sometimes it did, sometimes it did not. Under Genghis Khan, and later his successors, the empire expanded with astonishing speed. Northern China fell after years of brutal campaigns. The great Khwarezmian Empire collapsed under relentless Mongol attacks after diplomatic relations broke down. Persian cities burned. Trade routes, stretching across Asia, came under Mongol control. Their armies crossed deserts, mountains, frozen rivers, and endless plains with astonishing determination. Kingdom after kingdom discovered that traditional methods of warfare were powerless against this new enemy. Even after Genghis Khan died in 1227, the expansion did not stop. His successors inherited not only a vast empire, but also one of the finest military organizations ever created. Experienced generals continued pushing westward, carrying the Mongol banners, farther than anyone had imagined possible. Among them was Subutai, perhaps the greatest military strategist of the age. He had fought in dozens of campaigns, studied countless enemies, and planned invasions with extraordinary attention to detail. He understood that victory depended on preparation long before the first arrow was fired. For years, Mongol scouts explored unfamiliar lands beyond the empire's borders. They gathered information about rivers, forests, roads, fortifications, and political rivalries. They learned which kingdoms distrusted one another and which rulers were slow to cooperate, while many European leaders believed the distant East posed little threat. The Mongols were already studying Europe with remarkable precision. Then came the first alarming encounters. In 1223, a coalition of Rus princes and their Cuman allies met a Mongol force near the Khalkha River. Believing they faced only another steppe army, the coalition confidently advanced. Instead, they encountered the same devastating tactics that had destroyed countless armies before them. The Mongols feigned retreat, stretched the enemy's formation over many miles, and then attacked with overwhelming coordination. The result was a catastrophic defeat. Many princes were killed, and the surviving armies were shattered. To much of Europe, however, the disaster seemed distant. Few imagined that these mysterious horsemen would return in far greater numbers. Kings remained occupied with their own rivalries. Nobles fought neighboring lords. Political disputes consumed courts across the continent. The warnings arriving from the east were often dismissed as exaggerations. They were not. By the end of 1240, the Mongols had already crushed major centers of resistance across Eastern Europe. The great city of Kiev fell after a devastating siege. Once one of the most important cities of the region, it was left in ruins. Refugees fled westward, carrying stories that sounded impossible to believe. Stories of endless columns of horsemen, cities erased from existence, and armies that simply could not be defeated. Many European rulers still hoped the destruction would stop at their borders. Instead, it was only the beginning. The greatest invasion Europe had ever faced was about to begin. Part 2. The day Europe thought it would end. In the early months of 1241, the Mongol invasion reached the heart of Europe. Unlike many conquerors before them, they did not march as a single massive army. Instead, they divided their forces into several highly coordinated groups, each with a specific objective. One army advanced into Poland, another swept toward Hungary, while smaller detachments spread fear across the surrounding lands. Though separated by hundreds of miles, they moved with astonishing precision, striking almost simultaneously and preventing European rulers from organizing a united defense. The first major shock came in Poland. Duke Henry II of Silesia realized that if the Mongols were not stopped quickly, they could continue deeper into the Holy Roman Empire. Knights from different regions joined his army, believing that heavily armored cavalry would finally defeat the invaders. Many had spent their entire lives preparing for battles exactly like this one. On April 9th, 1241, near the town of Legnica, the two armies met. At first, the European knights charged with confidence. Their heavy armor, powerful horses, and long lances had broken countless enemies in previous wars, but the Mongols refused to fight on European terms. They showered the advancing cavalry with arrows before retreating in apparent panic. Believing victory was within reach, many knights pursued them. It was exactly what the Mongols wanted. The retreat was an illusion. Hidden units suddenly appeared on both flanks, while mounted archers surrounded the pursuing force. Arrows rained from every direction. Horses collapsed. Commanders lost contact with their men. Thick clouds of smoke, deliberately created by the Mongols, added to the confusion. What had begun as an organized attack quickly turned into complete chaos. Duke Henry II was killed during the battle. According to several medieval accounts, his severed head was displayed on a spear to intimidate nearby defenders. Whether every detail of those stories is accurate remains uncertain, but there is little doubt that the defeat at Legnica sent shockwaves across Europe. Yet Legnica was only a diversion. The Mongols' main objective lay farther south. Just 2 days later, on April 11th, another Mongol army confronted the forces of King Bela, the Fourth of Hungary, near the Sajo River, in what became known as the Battle of Mohi. The Hungarian king had assembled one of the largest armies in Central Europe, believing sheer numbers would stop the invasion. Again, the Mongols proved otherwise. During the night, they secretly constructed additional bridges across the river, while distracting the defenders at the main crossing. Before dawn, Mongol troops attacked from multiple directions. Their engineers used siege weapons on the battlefield itself, bombarding defensive positions, while mounted archers continuously harassed the Hungarian lines. The Hungarian camp became a trap. As panic spread, soldiers attempted to escape through a gap that the Mongols had intentionally left open. It appeared to be a route to safety, but it led directly into open ground where cavalry and archers waited. Thousands were cut down while fleeing. Others drowned trying to cross the river. By the end of the battle, the Hungarian army had effectively ceased to exist. King Bela IV barely escaped with his life, fleeing westward as the Mongols continued their advance. Now nothing stood between the invaders and much of Central Europe. News traveled quickly. Monasteries recorded frightening reports of entire regions destroyed. Refugees carried stories of villages reduced to ashes and armies annihilated in a single day. Some believed the horsemen were the punishment foretold in the book of Revelation. Others thought they were the legendary armies of Gog and Magog, unleashed at the end of time. Fear spread faster than the Mongol cavalry itself. In cities across Europe, church bells rang as people gathered to pray. Fortifications were strengthened. Supplies were stored behind castle walls. Messengers rode desperately between kingdoms, seeking alliances that should have been formed years earlier. Many believed Vienna would fall next, then perhaps northern Italy, then France. No one knew where the advance would end, and based on everything the Mongols had achieved over the previous decades, there was little reason to believe anyone could stop them. Yet just as Europe braced for what seemed like an unstoppable invasion, something extraordinary happened. The Mongols stopped, not because they had suffered a crushing defeat, not because European armies had suddenly become stronger, not because their tactics had failed. Instead, events thousands of kilometers away changed the course of history. In December 1241, word reached the Mongol commanders that Genghis Khan, the Great Khan and successor to Genghis Khan, had died. According to Mongol tradition, the leading princes of the royal family were expected to return for the election of a new Great Khan. While historians continue to debate exactly how decisive this was in the decision to withdraw, it was undoubtedly one of the major factors influencing the campaign. There were practical reasons as well. The further west the Mongols advanced, the longer and more vulnerable their supply lines became. Central and Western Europe offered fewer open grasslands than the Eurasian steppe, making it more difficult to sustain the enormous numbers of horses on which the Mongol army depended. European stone castles and fortified cities also required time and resources to reduce, slowing the rapid style of warfare that had brought the Mongols so much success. Instead of continuing deeper into Europe, the main Mongol forces gradually withdrew toward Hungary and then back to the east. Europe had survived, but survival should not be mistaken for victory. The Mongols had defeated nearly every major army that stood against them. They had demonstrated that even Europe's greatest kingdoms were vulnerable to a disciplined, highly mobile, and brilliantly organized military force. Had circumstances been different, had leadership in the Mongol Empire remained stable and strategic priorities shifted westward, the history of Europe might have unfolded in a very different way. The invasion left a lasting mark. European rulers began to rethink their defenses, improve communication between kingdoms, and take threats from the east far more seriously. Chroniclers preserved stories of the invasion for generations, describing it as one of the most terrifying moments their world had ever experienced. The Mongols would never again launch an invasion of Europe on the same scale, but for one brief moment in history, they came closer than almost anyone thought possible. And for countless people living in 1241, it truly felt as though the end of Europe had arrived.